useful event for you. I see a number of familiar faces, so I appreciate I'll take a few minutes of your time, and hopefully we'll have time at the end if there's any questions. I'm going to touch on a few things. One, I'm going to talk about the supply chain, some of the challenges that we're seeing in that particular area, some of the good, some of the bad, or production or the result of good things anyway. Then I'll get into a little bit more on safety, talk about our performance in general, which we released earlier this year, talk about accident reports and the status of that is something that we've been harping on over the last little while. I'll touch on risk-based IATA and IATA in general in terms of its contribution to safety overall. And then I'll get into two specific items which some of you may have been familiar or may be familiar with, GNSS interference, spoofing and jamming. I'll talk about that a little bit, and then finish off with turbulence, which I think you all have seen in the press of late. It's something that we are paying close attention to. So specifically on the supply chain, sort of post-COVID, we've seen some dramatic impact to the industry, whether that's in the form of aircraft deliveries, which is probably the most obvious areas of impact, where we went through a couple of years where we just weren't making and delivering aircraft, all of a sudden everybody wants one, and as a result, it's had a dramatic impact on deliveries. It's going to take a number of years to catch up. More specifically, in terms of the stats, in terms of we were 11% fewer aircraft this year than had been planned. If we use last August as the benchmark, it's around 17%. Most of that is being felt in North America and Europe, but the rest of the world is seeing it. And as you can see on the slide, we're not going to ramp up or be where we anticipated we would be by sometime between now and 2025. And some predictions are actually into 2026. So there are a lot of reasons for that. I'll get into that a little bit in a second. But so apart from the delivery challenges, the supply chain is also seeing significant challenges on the maintenance side. So what are those? I guess we're not immune to it in any industry. You've seen it, but this industry in particular on the skilled labor shortage side. You often talk about pilot shortages, but we're actually seeing some significant shortages on the mechanical side of the business, something that is catching up, but again, it takes time. There are some technical inefficiencies that we've had to deal with, especially on the engine side, as the industry braced with a couple of particular engine issues, but also getting used to new gen engines and how to service them. It has resulted in some poor forecasting because it's the inability or inaccessibility of parts has made it pretty difficult for airlines to predict the volumes based on their inputs. So airplanes are spending more time in the hangar, or engines spending more time at MRO sites, which are also seeing an impact on demand. Raw materials a problem. Geopolitical issues has exacerbated that, especially on when you talk about titanium and aluminum, and where a lot of that comes from is in a place that's under great scrutiny at the moment, as we probably all are well aware of. So what has resulted is, demand, and there's a lot of or lack of alternatives in terms of being able to find our way out of these challenges. It's gotten better. It's not near as bad as it was at the beginning of coming out of COVID, but it's certainly going to have a long-lasting impact because deliveries, new aircraft, having an impact on cost for the airlines, as well as seat availability and route availability. So, as I said, we're working through that, but we're probably not going to be out of the woods until the end of 2025, 2026. So we have been surveying our members on a regular basis. We also had a workshop in our Geneva offices about 6 weeks ago, where we brought in a number of aircraft manufacturers, OEMs, airlines, where we facilitate the discussion, because obviously that's our role, is to make sure that we're sort of acting in the middle, trying to find out what we can do to help. In some ways we're limited, but there are some things that we could do better. Technical standards, technical record standards would certainly help. we're not necessarily as standardized or harmonized in this particular area of our business and the transferability of parts. That's something that we have agreed to embrace and work towards as an industry. Improving transparency and visibility on the inventory that's available is also very important, because right now that can prove very difficult. We've also seen some behavior that probably would be counterintuitive to the way parts used to be managed. Like a long time ago, probably within the last 10 to 15 years, airlines would be using just in time as their methodology, nothing on the shelves, sec tool on. We're now seeing airlines and MROs holding on to more parts than they normally would be. That also has posed challenges for access to inventory and expanding our parts repair capabilities. That's obviously something that we will all benefit from. That takes working with the regulators, the OEMs, and the industry at large to get there. So that's on the supply chain side. Switching gears a little bit in terms of safety. So in the next few slides, I'll cover off some of the safety topics that I mentioned earlier. And as this is our number one priority, obviously it has to get the attention that it deserves. A lot of numbers here, but I think the biggest soundbite from 2023 anyway is that it was the safest year on record. The accident count was lower in previous years, but also lower than the 5-year average. The all-accident rate is the lowest it's been since we started recording it. There were no jet hull losses last year. We did have a turboprop loss in terms of fatality in the early part of last year, which resulted in 72 fatalities. The risk now is actually lower than it's ever been as well, with 0.003. So the actual, I think it's 100,000 years of travel before you were involved in an accident. I don't really buy into those stats, but the fact is that it remains the safest mode of mass transportation, and 2023 was the best year that we've ever had in that sense. So how do we stay there? Staying there is not the easiest thing in the world, and it is why it is our number one priority. And it really is about focusing on standards, focusing on culture, which I'll talk a little bit about, and focusing on data, which I'll also touch on in terms of our OSA program and where we're taking that. In terms of standards, we talk about IOSA a lot. So if you're not familiar with IOSA, IOSA is our global benchmark in terms of auditing for our industry. We're looking at, right now we have 433 airlines participating in it, which is over 100 more than that are members of IATA, which I think speaks volumes to the value that IOSA brings. It not only focuses on standards, but also we're moving into what we'll call risk-based IOSA. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. So why do we profess IOSA's contribution? This slide perhaps says it all. As you can see, the IOSA those carriers that are IOSA members versus non-IOSA outperform to a large degree, 3 times better in most cases in terms of their performance versus those that are non-IOSA. So we are very proud of this program. It's been around for 20 years, actually 20 years last year, and it is something that we continue to focus on and enhance. So enhancing is an important part of any audit program. So the former way we did IOSA audits for our members and non-members was more on the compliance base. We have 916 standards that airlines are to conform to and illustrate that they're conforming to. We've been doing that for 20 years, but the industry is changing and focus more on risk-based. We were finding after a while that with the maturity of IOSA that the number of findings, as an example, were going down. Why? Because people are getting used to the program and are being compliance-based in nature, which is pretty much show us where it is in your manuals. We're moving now to a more tailored type of audit where we will use maturity index and airline's performance based on the data, whether that is incidents or accidents that they may have had in the last 12 to 24 months in the cycle from their last audit, and use that and focus on the areas that show up in their SMS, and that's what we will be doing most of our auditing. We'll still focus on the standards, and we'll still make sure that those standards are being adhered to, but we will spend most of our time looking at the greatest areas of risk, because every airline is different, and that will improve it. We've got 42 audits that I've done so far. On average, we do about 215 audits annually, because it's a 2-year cycle. And as of 2025, all IOSA audits will be done using this format. And we anticipate great results as a result of it. And in comparison to the 42 that we've done, based on the ones that we've done previously, the number of findings have increased significantly. Where airlines were priding themselves on 0 findings, that's near impossible now, which is a good thing, because it's not a witch hunt, but it's meant to make us better. Something that I mentioned earlier in terms of things that we harp on, status of accidents and investigation reports. So why do we beat this drum? We beat this drum because it's one of our best opportunities to learn. IOSA is important, SMS, safety management systems are important, data and performance is important, but this is equally as important. And we're not getting what we need from governments on this. So 52% of accident final status reports have not been filed, despite it being a requirement. Just in terms of Annex 13, their standard, the preliminary report of an accident is meant to be filed in the first 30 days. The published report is meant to be filed within 12 months after that, and there's supposed to be interim reports during that process. There can be examples of where that would be exceeded, but not to this extent. So we need governments to step up. We need an IATA to put pressure on countries that are not filing these reports on a timely basis. Why? Because we want to learn from them. It's as simple as that. One thing that's become also very clear, almost through every accident investigation, also through our IOSA audits, and just from intuitive knowledge over the years, leadership is important. So you can have everything written down that you want in terms of how safety, importance of safety in your airline, your airport, within the industry, but if you do not walk the talk, which starts at the top, then you're going to run into some challenges, whether that's in terms of a just culture or reporting culture, or just people following towing the company line, but actually doing something far different than what's been documented in terms of our standard operating procedures. In order to kind of focus on that, we've initiated a safety leadership charter. We started this in the fall of last year, and it's been taking off relatively well. I won't go through each and every item on this. Essentially, it means starting from the top, making sure that you're creating and fostering a culture within your industry, within your airline, and establishing a work environment that's clear, expectations that are acceptable, accountable, and creating an environment where everybody feels responsible for safety. It's not always easy, and especially with change from sort of changing of the guard, for lack of a better term, that we saw during the COVID period, where we lost a lot of experience in this industry. It's important to re-emphasize this. With new people, new entrants, you do run the risk that they don't quite understand the safety culture that has been able to grow and foster over the course of the last 20 or some odd years. And I tell you, having been in this industry now for 30, we are a lot different now than we were when I first started. And the ability or even thought of taking risk has diminished significantly, and we need to continue to keep that first and foremost in all of our employees' minds. So the charter is meant to reinforce that from the top down. And so far, like I said, we've just started this, so we're only a few months into it. We've got 73 airlines on board. That continues to grow. We will definitely see that grow as a result of this event, which is normally our best chance to reach out to our CEOs. And the disbursement, you can see, it's pretty even across the globe. With our goal of this year, I'd like to see us exceed 100. With the goal of next year, at least having half of our membership that have pledged to adhere to these principles in terms of safety leadership. The last two things that I'll speak about are our global navigation satellite systems, or GNSS, and some of the challenges that we've seen primarily starting in the beginning of last year, but continuing into this year. I'll get a little bit into where that is mostly in a second. But for those that don't know, jamming is basically blocking the signal, and spoofing is sending erroneous information to the system. And we're seeing an increase in it. We're about 40% higher than we were when we started taking the baseline of this in early 2023. Where? Europe and Middle East. Probably no shock to anybody. Most of the instances in Europe are directly related to the challenges that we're seeing in Eastern Europe and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and it's had a significant impact on GNS operations in those areas. The Middle East has always been a bit of a challenge, depending on certain locations and geopolitical issues, and that has remained to be evident as well, but not to any extent that we're seeing in Europe. So we kind of raised the flag or raised the bar on this early, middle part of last year, and I think we accomplished something at our end of year press briefing where we spent a little bit more time on GNSS, which I think some of the media coverage allowed us to get some exposure with the regulators to get it to a point where regulators actually began to get involved as well. Problem is that in some ways, in the key areas that we're focused on, data was dispersed all over the place. So nobody was looking at this collectively. We were, but we didn't have all the data either. And so IATA had their bid, and FAA had their bid, and some other regulators had theirs. We had our own. So we started to work on collecting and sharing that information to a larger degree, which is a great example of things that we need to do more of in any areas of operational safety. That sometimes we treat data as proprietary as opposed to sharing it so that we can come up with a better outcome. So we've been successful in getting that, which is why we can now see the picture of what's happening on GNSS globally. We have been working with aircraft manufacturers who believe that there is a responsibility for them to have a standard approach to this when it does happen. That's not the case today. We do have some recommended practices within IATA for our members, but not every member follows it, and they have their own procedures to deal with these spoofing and jamming incidents when they occur. We believe this should be more standardized. The airlines or aircraft manufacturers agree with us, so we're hoping that we'll see something a little bit more concrete from them. A better alerting system is also required, because that's not been the case in the past, so that all airlines can anticipate when and if and where this will take place. And the last thing is, there's been a bit of a push to move and race towards technology, which is a great thing. But we have backups and redundancy, which is reducing the risk of GNSS and failures in terms of spoofing and jamming. So we cannot see those removed, because they provide a redundancy which allows us to go to sleep at night, and this has to remain the case. And that is pretty clear now to regulators that perhaps was not as clear to them previously. IATA being an example where they had considered taking some of the air navigation approaches, radio navigation approaches out of some of their airports, which they are now not planning on doing, thankfully. And the last thing is turbulence. So we've got a couple of incidents of late, which is a finer point on turbulence. For sure, we're seeing challenges globally in terms of turbulence. Part of it's reporting. So I think that needs to be taken into context, that we're seeing for sure we're seeing an increase in turbulence. We're also seeing an increase in terms of airlines reporting it, which is a good thing, because what gets measured gets fixed. But it still remains rare, although I think everybody in this room probably have traveled, obviously. How many people in this room have actually experienced severe turbulence? 3. So it is rare, but it is not something, I'm not saying that to diminish the importance of the subject, but just to say that it is a rare occurrence. But it is on our radar to monitor. When we look at this, data is not often shared. So old antiquated systems, which are PIRAPs or pilot reports, not dynamic, they're not embedded into aircraft flight planning systems. They may be available for pilots prior to departure, reading off previous reports on the flight, or the dispatchers may have it available to them. But it's not dynamic, and it's not necessarily as shared as it could be. So it could be only specific to one airline, not necessary to all. It's fragmented on top of it, which makes it challenging. And the airlines actually need and have asked us to see beyond what they currently have available today, so that they can make plans accordingly. Does not address clear air turbulence, and there's no silver bullet when it comes to turbulence. But more information and more data will definitely improve the situation, and more coverage. So, one of the requests from our airlines was to create a product. Now, we've done so. We're not the only ones. We don't intend to be the only ones. The more, the merrier. The biggest goal is to actually have more data than we so that airlines can use to help manage the situation better. We've got 21 airlines using the system today with over 2,400 aircraft. That's integrated into 12 different service providers so that they can get into the cockpit when they need it. Our goal this year is to have over 150 million flights that provide reports on turbulence. We'll get there. And we're seeing this product grow as well as in other sectors as well, and other products that are out there. So, like I said, the more data we get, the better we are, and the more information that our pilots have at their fingertips, the safer we will become. And so that is something that we will continue to monitor. We use data to ensure that we understand where the challenges are. And unfortunately, there will continue to be incidents, but we'll learn from them as best we can. Perhaps, hopefully, another 23 years before we have a death on board, like we did most recently within the last month or so. So with that, I think that's it. I tried to be as brief as possible. Happy to take any questions that you may have on some of the things that I touched on. I'll turn it over to KK.
We'll start at the back of the room with Dina.
Hello, Dina Kamen from the National. And just to pick up on what you just said on there's an increasing number of incidents of turbulence, can you attribute some of the reasons for that? Are we talking about, is it related to climate change? Is it related to just more flights being out there than before? And also, how far do you see the use of AI tools being integrated into this data collection you referred to with the Turbulence Aware program?
Okay, so one is reporting, that's for sure. And secondly is, because we've had some pretty significant incidents, reporting from a media standpoint also has contributed to greater awareness around turbulence. There has been some studies on the potential environmental factors. That's still something that we're monitoring. I'm not saying that it has the potential to increase, but that's still yet to be proven. And usually from our industry standpoint, we take that as a warning, but we certainly can't put a finger on saying this is all environmentally driven. That's for certain. But we are seeing an increase, and I think that's why it's at the center of our radar at the moment. In terms of AI, I think AI will have the benefit of changing everything in our lives, but we have to take a pragmatic approach to its use. And I think at this point we're test beds, and we'll see where that technology potentially has the potential to improve, and we will embrace that, but we're not anywhere near that yet.
Yeah, and then there's more flights as well. We're flying. We'll take a question in the middle of the room. Yep. We'll just get you the mic.
Hello, it's Robin Ironside from The Australian. Do you collect data on injuries in flights as well as fatalities? And if so, is turbulence the leading cause of injuries in flights?
We do, and yes. Yeah.
Can you expand on that? Have you got any hard data?
Pardon me?
Have you got any hard data? Like, have you got any figures on that you can share with us?
No. We could take it offline and share some information with you, but we don't. I don't have anything on stats on the top of my head. But yes, the leading cause of injuries. I think the FAA is the best source in terms of being able to track that, and it's illustrative that that's the largest cause. And it has been. It's not new.
And what's second?
What's second?
Yes.
That's a good question. I don't know.
We can find out actually because we do.
I think it's so minuscule that it's not important, but that, or everything's important, but it hasn't been something that's come up. It's a good question. I'll have an answer for you next year.
And is there any evidence that the turbulence episodes that we are seeing are becoming more severe?
Severity is not, no. We haven't seen an increase in severity. We've seen an increase in the amount, but not in terms of severity.
Hello, I'm Claire Boulot from the French Media Challenges. I wanted to know if you begin to see some impact of the logistics subject regarding Boeing, for instance, from one part and turbulences from the other part on the passengers' behavior. I mean, have you seen if some passengers begin to be afraid of taking the plane, and especially Boeing, because it's something we can hear, but I don't know if there is any data or survey on it.
No data, and I'm not seeing any indication that there's been an apprehension to fly, because I think the stats would indicate that the desire to fly still hasn't been suppressed post-COVID. Has some of the recent events had an impact on people's psyche when they travel, perhaps, but not to any large degree statistically. Nobody's been able to indicate that that's a problem. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that most people believe that we are, believe and know that this industry is safe, and some spectacular incidents don't necessarily indicate that there's a systemic problem, and that actually is the case. And so we had a rough week in the first week of 2024, but we haven't really seen anything since. So.
Alex.
Hi, Alexander Colwell from Reuters. We're seeing airlines make announcements of changes in policies like seatbelts. We're also hearing about airlines adopting AI technology for turbulence. But you're saying that severe turbulence is quite rare. So are there any concerns here that this attention, this distraction could take away resources that could be better spent elsewhere on safety?
No. I mean, the idea of wearing a seatbelt, it's been a recommended practice from IATA, and most of our members adhere to it or have their own individual policies around it, that wearing a seatbelt while flying is a good idea. I don't know, again, show of hands, when I'm on an airplane, I don't take my seatbelt off unless I go to the washroom. And I loosen it and I keep it on. Why do I do that? Because I don't want to be one of them. So I think that's pretty simple, and that doesn't take resources, it takes common sense. In terms of AI, I think, like I said earlier, we all run into this shining light of artificial intelligence. It's important that we understand it, but and we are embracing it, but we're not anywhere near this actually having a significant impact on how we do business. But it has potential, and we would be remiss not to understand it better. But again, it's not distracting anybody from the most important things when it comes to heart safety.
Hi, Shahara from Trapdown, Middle East. This question is a bit different. It is on safety, but those who are allergic to certain smells and especially food being served, do you have any data on that? Because recently I actually encountered it and I thought I was actually dying because the food they served had a certain smell of a certain meat product. And since I'm allergic to it, that was a reaction that I had. So do you have any data on that, especially food allergens and things like that?
No. That's the first time I've ever encountered that question. I mean, airlines pay a specific amount of attention to trying to keep people nuts is probably the most prevalent example of that. I've never heard anything, it's never been part of any of our safety group or advisory council discussions around smells. It's an interesting question, however, and I will take it back and see if is it something that we do track. But off the top of my head, no. At least not at the moment, or maybe you've sparked something.
I mean, I think if a passenger lets the airline know they've got a severe allergy, then the airline obviously tries to accommodate in case of nuts, sometimes you get on the plane and they announce, please don't eat any nuts, we've got someone with a severe allergy, so yeah, just a good question. And then Karen.
Grace Young from the Straits Times. In the wake of the SQ321 turbulence incident, how have IATA's members adjusted their safety measures? And also, have you noticed any airlines adopting the in-flight safety measures with regards to meal service and seatbelt signs like SQ did?
There's been a few that have reviewed it. We've seen increased interest in the turbulence aware product, which I think is a good thing, because we are, as I mentioned, proponents of data sharing, so that airlines can use them. Most airlines already have these policies in place in terms of maintaining the use of the seatbelt at all times, so that's not new. And so reinforcing it, perhaps some, but we haven't seen any dramatic change because most airlines have had pretty decent, solid procedures in this regard anyway, and SQ is included. But obviously, anytime you have an incident that close to home, for sure you're going to reevaluate your procedures and reinforce them and improve them if possible. So that's basically where we are on that.
And have airlines adjusted their flight routes to avoid passing the Irrawaddy Basin where it happened?
And that's the whole idea of turbulence aware is to, yes, we're aware of it, you do your best to avoid it. Where it becomes a challenge is when you can't see it, and that happens, and that will continue to be a challenge. But with increased data will allow us to be able to make better decisions in case our weather radar isn't picking up where most turbulence can occur, and I'm talking about clear air, which is almost impossible at this point to forecast.
But today, the IATA Turbulence Awareness Platform only has 21 airlines as members.
Yeah.
Have you seen an accelerated rate in the membership post SQ321?
Yeah, there's conversations with quite a few airlines. I mean, we'd be remiss to actually name them, but yes, there has been an increased interest.
Is SQ one of them as well?
I can't comment on individual airlines. It would not be fair for me to do that.
I would recommend you would ask SQ that question.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
sure they'd be happy to answer it.
I think one of the main things that's come out of it, and obviously the tools that do exist to be able to help with the turbulence, the airlines now have a better understanding. The more they get on board, the more data is shared, then the better it works. So that's one of them.
Thank you.
We'll go to Karen.
You promised to be nice, Karen, remember?
I don't keep my promises.
You're not talking about security or customs, I could throw them under the bus.
Karen Walker at John's Wood. I will switch the topic a little bit though, okay? So when you were talking about the accident safety reporting, those that are not complying with the the speed and the frequency or actually not filing at all, I'm sure you can't name countries, but are there particular regions maybe that you can say concern about? And is there a trend, like, is it a case of sort of like willful, you know, government saying we're not going to do this, or is it more a case of they don't have the resources for whatever reason?
I think it's all of the above. There actually, surprisingly, isn't any significant trend from one region to the other, which is a bit surprising, because I think off the top of your head, automatically think that certain countries that are a little bit more insular in their behavior would be less likely to share, but that has not been the case. So it's kind of dispersed pretty even globally. There are a host of reasons of why it's not being done. Sometimes it's resources, but there's also a labor component in terms of sharing this information. Not unlike USAP reports that ICAO produce that we don't get visibility on either. So it's not a new phenomenon, but we're putting pressure on it because we believe that, okay, if you don't want to share the audit reports that you're doing on a global basis, at least share the results of the accident reports so that you can learn from them. The regulators do. So if there's something that's obvious, although they haven't communicated the accident report, they will find other ways, and you'll see indications in terms of their regulation change that will lead to one to believe that it was a result of an accident investigation that had not been shared. So it's kind of all of the above, really.
Yeah, hi, it's Careen from Bloomberg. Just a question on the last slide to clarify the turbulence aware program. So if you're hoping for 150 million data from 150 million flights, so this is historical data that a pilot could access in real time as they're flying into a particular area?
Historical data, meaning like it's real-time data. Yeah, it's as it's happening. So it's meant to be built into the aircraft systems, flight planning systems, so that it's real time. So pilots can actually adjust their flying behavior based on what's in the system.
Okay, got it. And just a final question: do you ever sort of envisage a world where seatbelts would be mandatory on planes?
Well, unless you read the seatbelt sign on all the time. Mandatory, I'm not sure. I guess I think what you're seeing, and I think the majority of airlines who fly are going to suggest that you wear your seatbelt at all times. And I think that's good behavior anyway. I think it's something that you're going to see more of that suggested. If it's not part of the announcements, it will be. But each individual airline still has their own operating procedures and their own way of approaching this. But I think that that you will see more and more that's suggested that when you're seated and not using the washroom, you probably should have your seatbelt on.
Yeah, global standards actually stipulate that passengers should be seated and wear their seatbelts when there's turbulence. And IATA guidance actually advises what next said that passengers should have their seatbelt on at all times.
Hi, thank you. John Ferrer from Air Transport World. I think 2021 NTSB published a report recommending FAA to update their turbulence processes, which was revised in 2027. Do you think there's a need to do so, and is IATA urging FAA to update the processes as well? Thank you.
Well, we encourage regulators. Regulators still do what regulators want to do, and so I think that at the moment anyway, in terms of standards that are in place, we're in good shape. But we always need to be better, and I think to the earlier question in terms of where are we going with seatbelts. I mean, seatbelts saves lives in cars. Why would air transport be any different? And I think as you asked that question, I was thinking, in some places you're seeing it more and more. The U.S. is a great example of where you may see a pilot putting a seatbelt sign and actually advising the customers they don't intend to take it off. That never happened before. And they're doing that because they have availability of data, which is being shared from the regulator in the FAA's case, but also through the use of other products. And so we would be flying from Denver to Seattle, and the pilot was looking at potential for turbulence. He won't turn off that seatbelt. That wasn't always the case. And there was a lot, used to be a time, again, I've been around 30 years, where passengers would get pretty impatient if that seatbelt sign didn't come off because they wanted their drink or they wanted their coffee. But now they realize that it's actually synonymous with safety, and that's a good thing. So I think we've seen these things gradually happen without us really recognizing that it's happening, and that's done so to make it safer and make us safer.
Just in the middle and then.
Hi, my name is Pablo Garcia from ABC News in Argentina. We have seen lately many accidents or incidents where people leave the plane with their belongings, their backpacks or their items with them. Is there anything that, as an industry, we can do to avoid that? Maybe fines or something like that?
Yeah, fines never work, unfortunately. And I mean, despite the fact that it is a standard, it's a global standard, it's a requirement, and in every flight you're on, the flight attendants are actually telling you, in the case of emergency, to not only how to put your mask on, but to leave the aircraft, leave your belongings behind. The propensity is that that's still a challenge. The only way to continue to enforce that is to, first, not have any accidents, which is obviously the number one way to avoid these particular scenarios, but also to continue to enforce education to our customers that there's a reason for this and it's for your own benefit. And we've seen many examples of evacuations that have gone very, very well. Actually, more of them than not. But when they don't go well, we do see examples like that become pretty prevalent, and it's something that media will latch onto because it's an opportunity to highlight that it's not perfect. But I think in most cases it's actually pretty good, and we just need to continue to educate our customers why that exists and why that regulation is there.
And then right at the back.
Eric Arnett from newspaper Le Soir in Belgium. A part of the supply chain problem, does IATA consider that there is no problem of security with buying planes?
Security with buying planes? We've had some incidents, or one in particular out of the UK with a supplier for aircraft engine parts that were not certified or tracked. That's been the only real example. It was addressed. I think one of the things that I've mentioned in terms of tracking and traceability and standards around that is why it's so important that we have that in place to avoid this type of thing in the future. But I think from a security standpoint, no, it hasn't been raised as a significant challenge beyond the fact that we have one pretty obvious incident in a company in the UK that was unfortunate, but it's not the norm.
Dominic Ando from Aviation Ghana. We know Africa doesn't have a particularly nice record when it comes to safety. Is there any initiative to assist airlines on the continent to improve on their safety record and get on the IOSA register as well?
You can lead a horse to water. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody for the last 20 years has been doing what they can to try to increase safety awareness and safety procedures and safety performance in the continent of Africa. There's been some very willing states, and then there's been some laggards. We do have Focus Africa, which we launched last year, which is an attempt to try to focus primarily on safety and bring up where we can, from our industry standpoint, from the airline standpoint, to improve. We also have the CASIC program, which we've launched, which is in conjunction with a number of regulators as well as aircraft manufacturers and OEMs to try to increase safety performance. I think in the time that I've been around, it seems to be more interest in taking a more continental approach to safety than there has been in the past. So I think we're on the right track. We just need to be patient, and I think some of the areas around training, around infrastructure, around standards, those are the areas that we're focused on, and we have a willingness amongst the regulators as well as the support parties. So CASIC and Focus Africa are the two main areas that we are trying to drive on our side.
That's actually 4 o'clock if people want to leave for the Diversity and Inclusion Awards, but if we've got any other questions, we'd be happy to take them.
sufficiently bored you. Thank you very much. And I hope everybody have a great rest of the conference.